Hey Wargamers, today we are finally going to talk about the new rules for Farsight Enclaves in Psychic Awakening: The Greater Good. This is a video I planned to do for a while, and things just got busy. It didn't happen. It got to the point where I figured I would wait for the Greater Good FAQ to come out, and well, yesterday we got a FAQ for Space Marines instead, which probably means that we're not going to get a Greater Good FAQ within the next couple days. So I figured we might as well talk about it now and then revisit Farsight Enclaves once the FAQ comes out if there are any major changes. I think that there might be, considering that Farsight Enclaves is certainly one of the strongest components of this book and is dependent on some interactions that may be adjusted in the FAQ. They may not be, misintentional things, but they might dial down the rules a little bit on them. Hopefully not. Hopefully all these great things persist. There are basically 3 pages of rules we have to pay attention to here for Farsight Enclaves. The first is general faction rules, including a new match play rule for commanders. It says if you are playing a match play game with a Battleforged army, you can include no more than 2 Farsight Enclave commander units in each detachment. This is a huge deviation, of course, from the previous match play commander rule, which applied to all seps, that stated you could only have 1 commander per detachment. This is a big deal because we know commanders are good, right? We like to have commanders, and if you're playing Farsight, you like having commander suits. That's cool, but also vastly powerful. We can now have 6 commanders in a Battleforged 2,000 point army. Fantastic. This also vastly undermines the presence of the 8 in this book at all, or their existence in the first place. They are almost purely a narrative choice now because of this rule. You can now take 6 commanders, which is exactly the same number of commanders in the 8, but equip them as you would like, not having any inefficiency in terms of taking suboptimal weapon choices or anything like that. You can take them exactly as you like them, which is fantastic. You don't have to pay for war gear you don't want. You don't have to pay for weapons that you're not going to use. You can take them exactly as you want them. So why would you ever take the 8? Yes, the 8 are 8 models, but 2 of those are not commanders. You have Ovesa, which is a Riptide, and Oblatai, which is a Broadside. So yeah, they have some special rules that help them, but really that's not a very big benefit for the tax you pay and all the inefficiency built in amongst the 8. So this new match play rule is very strong and also, begs the question why you would ever take the 8. The next rule is that all Farsight Enclaves units in Codex Tau Empire gain the aggressive footing ability. Aggressive footing. When resolving an attack made with a ranged weapon by a model in this unit against an enemy unit within 12 inches, treat that enemy unit as having 1 more marker light counter than it actually has. This may not seem like a huge deal, but it really can be. Basically, this allows you to be more effective when you are doing Farsight Enclaves things, which generally include being fairly close. So it compounds on top of the existing Farsight Enclave Sept Tenet and makes your units that much more likely to be successful in their attacks. Notably, this compounds very well with all of the other stratagems, all the other things we've talked about in the Greater Good that allow you to have some level of marker light independence or marker light agnosticism, that you don't really care if you have marker lights on the board because there are ways that you can generate them using economy of command points or Sept Tenets or something else. There are ways that you can make marker lights appear without having that number of marker lights actually on the board. It gives you tactical flexibility. Yes, you still want to have marker lights on the table because you need to start it somehow generally. But having this ability amplifies your ability to be effective without worrying about your marker lights being taken out turn 1, turn 2. You have some resilience built in. It's also worth knowing that this works very well with Deep Strikers. One of the things we've talked about in the past is that cyclic ion blasters on crisis suits, if you deep strike them in, overcharge them, you need to have something to reroll 1s. If you do this, if you have aggressive footing on a unit of crisis suits that deep strike in and are within 12 inches, you don't have to worry about marker light support anymore. You don't have to bring the marker light support with you necessarily. You can if you want to have more than 1 marker light token on something, but overall, this solves a lot of problems of deep striking into those nooks and crannies where you can't get marker light support into. this is very useful in that context specifically. The next pages are stratagems, and there are some doozies here. The first is Veteran Cadre for 1 or 2 command points. It says, use this stratagem before the battle. Select 1 Crisis Battlesuit or Crisis Bodyguard unit from your army that contains 3 models for 1 command point, or 1 Crisis Battlesuit or Crisis Bodyguard unit from your army that contains 4 or more models for 2 command points. Models in that unit have a weapon skill characteristic of 4-up and a ballistic skill characteristic of 3-up. You can only use this stratagem once per battle. So this is fantastic, both from a fanboy perspective, because people have always wanted Crisis Suits to hit on 3s, but also from a gameplay perspective. A Crisis Suit unit that hits on 3s is very efficient, very favorable when compared to both Commanders and Riptides. You can give out a lot of firepower for a very small amount of points if you're hitting on 3s. If you compound Veteran Cadre with Coordinated Engagement, which allows them to act as if they had 5 marker lights on a target, then you essentially have a unit full of Commanders, and the trade-off is even better than hitting at 3s. So this is extremely valuable. If you are playing Farsight Enclaves, I think this makes Crisis Suits basically an auto-include, although it is cost-intensive if you're taking a larger unit of Crisis Suits as well as using Coordinated Engagement. That's 4 command points. You have to build your list with that CP expenditure in mind. But if you're taking Farsight Enclaves, you're probably going to be taking Crisis Suits simply because of this alone. Then you'll be filling out the rest of your army with, Riptides and, stealth suits maybe too. But having your elite slot have at least 1 Crisis Suit unit in it is probably going to be a very common thing going forward, just because of Veteran Cadre. The next stratagem is Defense in Numbers. Use this stratagem in the fight phase or your opponent's shooting phase when a Crisis unit or a Crisis Bodyguard unit from your army is chosen as the target of an attack. Until the end of that phase, when a model in that unit would lose a wound, roll a d6 on a 5-up. That wound is not lost. So you give a unit of Crisis Suits a 5-up Feel No Pain. This is pretty good. It's 2 CP. That's expensive, but if you're turn 4, turn 5, and you're running low on drones, and you really need that unit of Crisis Suits to stay on the board, it's probably worth it. You can do a lot with a 5-up Feel No Pain. And especially if we're thinking about combining this with things like reactive countermeasures from the main prototype weapons list, we can make a unit of Crisis Suits on their own, not including their drones, very, very resilient. So this, I think, is a really good opportunity in some situations to make those Crisis Suits even more effective. The next one is Furious Assault. Use the stratagem in your charge phase when a jetpack unit from your army finishes a charge move. For each model in that unit, you can select 1 enemy unit within 1 inch of that model and roll 1d6. On a 3-up, that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. This is for 1 command point and notably applies to the jetpack keyword, not just to battle suits. I think a lot of people see this and immediately think about battle suits, but really, this is a mechanic that's based on the number of models and the number of models you can fit within 1 inch of those models. So having a large base like a Crisis Suit is actually disadvantageous because there's only so many that you can fit in. What's a jetpack unit that has a really small base? Drones. What about drones, right? You can have a big old cluster of drones, far more bases than you could have in a Crisis Suit unit. You can have them charge in and then, boom, lay on quite a large number of mortal wounds. On a 3-up, that's 2/3. So if you're taking a unit of 9 drones and you get all of them into close combat, that's 6 wounds that you're doing with drones. So that's where I would spend this. I would have, the drones would be supported. You would have maybe your Crisis Suits go in there to do some punches, but really those drones are what are going to be driving the mortal wounds in this stratagem. So that's where I'd be using that. The next stratagem is Focus Fury. Use this stratagem in your shooting phase when a character model from your army is chosen to shoot with. Until the end of that phase, when resolving an attack made by that model, you can re-roll the wound roll. Okay, so this is also a very good stratagem. It's only 1 command point. It can make your Fusion Blaster Cold Star, your Cyclic Ion Blaster Enforcer suit really do the damage you want them to do. And for 1 CP, why not? It's the Farsight version of Command and Control Node, right? Command and Control Node is the opposite of this. You have to give up your shooting on a character to have them boost another unit's wounding rolls. Here, we're boosting our wounding rolls on a character, which I think is awesome. So, yeah, this is something that certainly if you have that one commander that needs to make the wounds happen, use this. Again, we're getting really CP expensive here, really cost intensive for all these stratagems. So you got to keep all this in mind, that it's really going to be important to build a list that has enough CP to do all the cool stuff that you want to do. The next stratagem is Danger Close for 1 CP. Use this stratagem in your shooting phase when a breacher team or strike team unit from your army is chosen to shoot with. Until the end of that phase, when resolving an attack made with a ranged weapon by a model in that unit against an enemy unit within 12 inches, you can reroll the wound roll. So this is cool. That works out really well. I think it's a little bit more of a context-specific choice, although certainly it works very well in conjunction with point-blank range, which allows you to fire your pulse blasters in close combat. So you could use this in coordination with that and really do a lot of damage to something that snuck up on you and got your breachers in a close combat. It also works well for strike teams too, right? Like you can make strike teams do a lot more damage on things that they normally would be wounding on 5s using this CP. So it works out. It works out well. It's not something that you're going to use every game, but is a good tool to have when you really need to make some wounds stick. The final stratagem is Firestorm for 1 CP. Use this stratagem at the end of your movement phase. Select up to 3 Tau Empire units with the Flyer Battlefield roll from your army. This stratagem costs 1 additional command point for each selected unit. Roll 1d6 for each enemy unit within 3 inches of any of those selected units. On a 4-up, that enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. This is okay. I definitely like the what is the jetpack one? Furious Assault. I like that a lot more for mortal wound generation. But if you were taking Remoras, for example, this would work out pretty well. It is cost intensive. It's 1 CP plus 1 for each unit that you pick. So it's a minimum of 2 actually. But yeah, you're spending a lot of command points to get a couple mortal wounds off. I don't see this being a really favorable thing, but if you're not going to be doing any of the other things we talked about, I guess you could do this. Notably, it says Tau Empire units, not Farsight Enclaves units. This is actually true for, I think all of these stratagems are just, non-SEP specific units. And maybe that's someplace we're going to see some clarification in the FAQ, but you could use these on units regardless of their detachment, so long as you have access to the stratagem. So I don't see this being a particularly appealing choice. In general, I think it's the weakest stratagem of the ones on this page in this book. But yeah, you could use it, but I don't know why you would. Okay, moving on to the relics, we have the Mirror Codex. Mirror Codex is something that was in the old Farsight Enclave supplement. I'm glad that it's making a return. It was in the previews we've talked about before, but basically it says when resolving an attack made by a model with this relic against a unit that is within 18 inches, you can re-roll the hit roll. So this is something that is going to be really good against armies that have -1, -2 to hit. But in general, it's going to be fairly redundant with your other options, particularly for Farsight Enclaves when we have a minimum of 1 marker light hit within 12 inches, which is not much further or much closer than 18 inches. You're going to be re-rolling your 1s anyway, which for most of the things that are taking this is going to be all of their misses, right? If you're hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, that is exactly the same thing as this. So I think it's useful in some matchups, but not something that I would build an army around. The next is Talisman of Arthas Moloch. Again, a returning favorite from the Farsight Enclave supplement of old. It says a model with this relic has a 5-up invulnerable save. Nice. A model with this relic can attempt to resist 1 psychic power in your opponent's psychic phase in the same manner as a psyker by taking a Deny the Witch test if that model is within 24 inches of the enemy model manifesting that psychic power. Good, it gives us a Deny the Witch. I was hoping that it would do a little bit more, be a little bit more oppressive for enemy psychers. I think 1 Deny the Witch is not really worth taking a relic over. I don't think it's worth giving up some of those prototype weapons that we've talked about. So again, I think this one's going to sit on the shelf a lot of the time. The 5-up invul save is nice. I think that gives it a little bit more weight in terms of, you could take a shield generator or you could take the Talisman of Arthas Moloch. It's not as good of an invul save, but it's better than nothing. So I think they tried. They're getting close. I just think some of these other choices are so much better that I wouldn't take them. Seismic Fibrillator Node. Once per battle, at the start of your opponent's turn, you can choose to activate this relic. If you do, until the end of that turn, when a model starts or ends a move within 6 inches of a model with this relic, roll 1d6. On a 1, that model's unit suffers 1 mortal wound. So this is something that there's been some chatter about, and the wording here suggests that you could do multiple mortal wounds per model per turn. And that if that's true, that makes this potentially really, really effective, if not context specific. But overall, I think there's a lot more reliable choices that we can take. This Seismic Fibrillator Node requires a model to be really close. And that's part of the deal with Farsight is you want to be close, but maybe you don't want to be that close. And maybe you don't want to be as close as you would need to be to get the maximum utility out of this. Other relics, other prototype weapons give you a lot more reliable, consistent output than something like this. So I think this is certainly something that could be very effective if everything lines up correctly. But I'm not the person to make that bet. So I'm going to go with some other options over this because of that. Overall, I think these are nice relics. Like we talked about, they all have certain strengths to them that can help you against certain types of lineups. For example, the Mirror Codex is going to be good against those -1, -2 armies. Talisman of Arthas Moloch is going to be useful against Psychers. And then Seismic Fibrillator Node are going to be good against things like Orcs or Tyranids, where you have a lot of models you need to do some mortal wounds quickly. So I can see them all having utility, and utility in a way that lines up with the Farsight narrative too. It's just not something that necessarily is going to outweigh those other choices I could make. All right, and then finally we get to Warlord Traits. The first is Blooded Through War. When a morale test is taken for a friendly Farsight Enclaves unit with the Bonding Knife Ritual ability whilst within 12 inches of this Warlord, it is automatically passed on a roll of 4-up instead of a 6. I really like this one, actually. It's useful. How many times has Bonding Knife Ritual come in and rolled that 6 and saved your butt? Now just imagine it happening 3 times more often. That's awesome. I really like this one. I think it can save you a lot of heartache. It's not something that I would take as my first choice, but it might be something that I would take as a secondary Warlord trait if I'm spending the CP to take more than one. That's something that I think could be useful there. Aggressive Tactician, commander model only. When this Warlord declares Mon Ka, it affects friendly Farsight Enclaves units within 12 inches of Warlord instead of just 6. This is something that's actually very useful, something that you would want to pair with the 8 if you were taking the 8, because it makes your Mon Ka affect so many more units. Now, you couldn't do that because Farsight can't take this, but overall, having the ability to make your Mon Ka affect a unit that has twice the rate, or a bubble that's twice the radius, means that you're getting a lot more people in that bubble, and you are able to be that more effective, be that much more mobile, be that much more accurate with your shooting. So I think that's really good. Again, something that I would consider taking as a secondary choice, because Mon Ka isn't something that I will necessarily utilize all the time. Even though I'm playing Farsight Enclaves here, I might not use Mon Ka as my Master of War ability. I might still use Kauyan for that first turn. But if you are someone that use Mon Ka a lot, then this is definitely something you want to bring. Then finally, we have Master of the Killing Blow. When resolving an attack made by this Warlord against a character unit, you can re-roll the hit roll. I think that's pretty mediocre. You can apply it to both close combat and shooting, but how often are you going to be shooting at a character, for one thing? In close combat, it's useful, but again, we're not, we're Tau. We're not doing a lot of damage in close combat. You could pair this very nicely, I think, actually, with Fusion Blades, but that's about it. I don't see this being worth giving up a different Warlord trait. Certainly neither of the first two in favor of this one. So yeah, I mean, it's nice if you want to design like a Cold Star with fusion blades and give him this, probably as, again, a secondary type of Warlord trait, then you could do that. But not something that I'm going to go out of my way to incorporate into my army. So overall, I think there are some really awesome strengths to this book. The stratagems in particular are fantastic. We talked about how great these things are up here, particularly veteran cadre, defense in numbers, focus fury, furious assault. These are all really good stratagems that I think are going to see a lot of play. And of course, the ability to take multiple commanders in a detachment is massively appealing. So overall, I think we're going to see lists focus around bringing commanders, bringing your crisis suits, supplementing them with some drones and riptides. Those riptides don't really benefit from a lot of these choices. You might want to put them in a specialist detachment with like gifted pilot and stabilization systems. The challenge there is that, of course, you have to have drones that are sept locked for them. So you're giving up some of your drone capacity to support those specialized riptide units as opposed to having them available for your commanders and your crisis suits. I'm not sure if that trade-off is worth it yet. It's something that time will tell. I'd like to hear your comments on that subject in particular. Do you think it's worth bringing just a pure Farsight Enclaves list with riptides in it, or do you think riptides should go in a specialist detachment? Let me know in the comments below, and of course, let me know your general thoughts on the Farsight Enclaves. I'm really excited to see these guys on the tabletop, excited to use their rules, and hopefully you are too. So, as always, thanks for watching, and happy wargaming.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over on Patreon. These are the people that really help drive the channel and make things happen. So special thanks to Shifty, Dallas Ellis, Jim Bob, Scott Heater, Nick Steele, Tao Oswald, Jackson, Stephen Cohen, Eric Jackson, Michael Byrne, Zealous Brimstone, Jared Egler, and Chris Kessler.